They laughed when I walked into that courthouse with a manila folder and no lawyer. 7 years later, I walked out with everything, and the only question I have for you is, did they really think I didn't notice what was in that file? My phone rang on a Thursday morning. It was my lawyer, Aisha Tamura. She said the custody hearing had been reopened. She said a modification had been filed. She said my visitation was suspended pending review. I said I understand. I already knew exactly what this was about. 7 years earlier, the courthouse on Garfield Street smelled like old paper and floor wax. I remember the folding chairs in the waiting area. Metal. Cold even in July. The fluorescent lights buzzed at a frequency that made your teeth feel loose. There was a coffee pot on a folding table near the clerk's window. Nobody touched it. Nobody trusted it. I sat in one of those chairs with a manila folder on my lap. My name is Dale Harrison. I was 36 years old that morning. I am a quiet man. I do not explain myself unless I have to. I read documents carefully, always twice, sometimes 3 times. My daughter Cora was 4 years old. She was home with my wife Helen. Helen had held my hand at the door when I left. She did not say anything. She did not have to. The case number was FC-20116-0847. Family Court, Division 9, County of Arapahoe, Colorado. Judge Patricia Ainsley presiding. Opposing counsel was a man named Jeffrey Crestman. He was the kind of lawyer who wore his confidence like a second suit. He had a way of looking at you like you were something he would deal with quickly and forget. Crestman stood near the clerk's counter while I signed in. He was talking to his associate in a voice just loud enough. He said, "This one filed pro se. No counsel. Should be 20 minutes." His associate smiled. Neither of them looked at me. Judge Ainsley was not cruel. I want to say that clearly. She was efficient. She had a full docket. She reviewed the filing, asked 3 questions, let Crestman speak for 11 minutes. She let me speak for 4. Then she ruled. Primary physical custody to Renata. My overnight visits, 17%, 11 nights per month. She said the arrangement was consistent with the child's established routine and current living situation. She signed the order with a pen she pulled from a cup on her desk. She did not look up when she signed. Crestman said something to his associate as they gathered their papers. I heard the word straightforward. I heard the word done. I walked to the clerk's window. I accepted the stamped copy of the order. I read it standing at the counter. Then I read it again. I folded it in thirds and placed it in my coat pocket. I said thank you to the clerk. I walked out through the heavy door and into the July heat. I did not look at Crestman. I did not look at anyone. People think stillness means you have nothing to say. That is not what stillness means. Stillness means you are counting. Stillness means you are 3 moves ahead and you are not ready to show them yet. I drove home on Route 83. I stopped at the intersection of Parker and Chambers and sat at the red light. The order was in my coat pocket. I could feel the weight of it against my side. Not the paper weight, the other kind. I had read the order twice at the clerk's window, and there was something in it, a date, a small one, printed in the lower left margin of page 3. It was the kind of thing most people would not notice. Most people do not read documents the way I read them. Helen was at the kitchen table when I got home. Cora was asleep. Helen looked at me and did not ask the question out loud. I sat down across from her. I put the order on the table between us. She looked at it. She said, "What did the judge say?" I said, 17%. She was quiet. Then she said, "What are you thinking?" I said, "I'm thinking." I picked up the order and folded it back into my pocket. I was not angry. I was not afraid. I had seen something in that document that Crestman had not seen. I did not know yet exactly what I would do with it. But I knew I would need it. I knew it was the beginning, not the end. Before we go any further, if this story is hitting different, hit subscribe right now, because what I uncovered in that courthouse basement is something that should have never been buried, and what happens next changed everything. Life did not stop moving. I went back to work the Monday after the hearing. I picked Cora up on Friday afternoons and returned her Sunday evenings. I made dinner. I read her bedtime stories. I went back to my regular life on the outside. On the inside, I was reading. Every evening after Cora was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table. I had a yellow legal pad, a blue pen, a folder. The folder was the same manila folder I had carried into the courthouse. I had added tabs to it, color-coded. Helen would walk through, see the papers spread across the table. She did not ask. Not at first. I started at the Arapahoe County Law Library on a Tuesday in August 2016. The building on Littleton Boulevard, second floor. There were 6 computer terminals along the east wall. The carpet was gray and old enough to have a memory. The shelves held binders going back to the 1970s. There was a copy machine in the corner that made a sound like a small engine turning over. I paid 20 cents per page. I was looking for something specific. I could not have named it exactly, but I knew the shape of it. I knew it existed somewhere in the records. I had seen that date in the margin of the order, October 14th, 1998, and it did not match anything cited in the ruling. Dates do not appear in court orders by accident. I came in Tuesday evenings, Saturday mornings. I pulled binders off shelves and sat with them at the reading tables. The pages smelled like old envelopes. The binders left dust on my hands. I took notes on my yellow pad in small, careful handwriting. I copied pages on the corner machine, 20 cents each. I filed everything into my folder. Weeks passed, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. Helen asked me one evening what I was looking for. She was standing in the kitchen doorway with a cup of coffee in each hand. She set one down near my elbow. She said, "What are you looking for?" I said, "Something they missed." She said, "Will you tell me?" I said, "When I know, you'll know." She sat down in the chair across from me. She did not push. She picked up a magazine and read while I worked. That was Helen. Cora asked me once why I always had papers on the table. She was 4.5. She climbed up into the chair next to mine and looked at the pages. I said, "To help us. To help you." She said, "Okay." She asked if she could have crackers. I got her crackers. In October 2016, I found the first piece. I was in the basement of the courthouse, not the library. Civil record storage, sublevel 1. Fluorescent lights, 2 of them flickering. Metal shelving units in rows that went back far enough you couldn't see the end. Box numbers written in marker on the ends of cardboard file boxes. I had requested box 1998 FCCV-114 through the records clerk. She brought it on a cart and left me with it at a folding table. The box smelled like a closed room. I put on the cotton gloves the clerk had given me. I opened the box. Inside were manila envelopes sorted by case number. I went through them one at a time. I found it on a Tuesday afternoon, 14 weeks after the original hearing, in Ray. Delmar versus Delmar, Arapahoe County Family Court, 1998, case number FC-1998-2241. I read it once, I read it again. The appellate ruling had found that a non-custodial parent's sustained documentation of material changes the custodial parent made without proper court notification, constituted sufficient evidentiary standing to compel a new custody evaluation. The phrase the judge used was, "Sustained parental diligence constitutes its own form of legal standing." That ruling was binding precedent in Arapahoe County. It had never been cited in FC 2016-0847. Not once. I sat at the folding table in the basement for a long time. The fluorescent lights flickered. The copy machine was 2 floors up. I carried the Delmar file carefully, both hands, up the stairs. I paid for 14 copies, $2.80. I walked back to the folding table. I read the ruling a 3rd time. That evening I called a family friend, a retired paralegal named Mrs. Bautista. I read her one paragraph. There was silence on the phone. She said, "Where did you find this?" I said, "Basement. Box 1998-FCCV-114. She said, "Dale, the judge never cited this. Crestman never cited this. This is binding precedent, and nobody cited it." I said, "I know." She said, "Do you understand what this means?" I said, "Yes." Helen was still awake when I got home. She looked at my face. She did not ask. I sat down at the kitchen table. I laid the Delmar ruling in front of me. I put my hands flat on either side of it. Helen put her hand on my shoulder. She said, "You found it." I did not say yes or no. I folded the ruling carefully and placed it in the red tab of my folder. I closed the folder. I said, "The long part starts now." She said, "How long?" I looked at the folder on the table. I said, "As long as it takes." The precedent was clear. The statute was on my side. I had found it in a cardboard box in a courthouse basement under 2 flickering lights. 14 weeks after a lawyer called my case straightforward. Now came the waiting. Year 1 went by, in the way hard years go. Slowly in the days, fast in the months. Cora turned 5, then 6. She lost her first tooth and named it Gerald and kept it in a small tin box. I kept my folder in the kitchen drawer. I kept Delmar in the red tab. I kept waiting. My lawyer at the time was a quiet man named Forsyth. He called me in the spring of year 2. He said Crestman's office had reached out. He said they were offering expanded visitation, 14 overnights per month instead of 11. He said, "It's an improvement, Dale. Might be worth considering." I said no. Forsyth said, "They might go higher." I said, "Tell them no." Crestman increased the offer 2 weeks later. 16 overnights, flexible scheduling around holidays. Forsyth relayed it over the phone. I was standing in the kitchen, still in my work coat. I said no. Forsyth said, "Can I ask why?" I said, "Because I don't need to." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "All right." Crestman did not understand the refusal. I know this because Forsyth told me his response was, and I quote, "What does he want? We're offering him more than the original order." He was not angry yet. He was confused. Confused men make offers. That was fine. I had time. Year 3. Cora was 7. She could ride her bike without training wheels. She had developed strong opinions about socks. She did not like socks with seams on the toes. I bought her seamless socks in 5 colors. I picked her up on Fridays. I returned her on Sundays. I sat at the kitchen table with my folder. I waited. The direct contact came in the fall of year 3. Renata called my cell phone on a Saturday evening. I was washing dishes. She asked if we could meet. She said it would be easier if we talked directly. She said without the lawyers. I said all right. We met at a coffee shop on Main Street. She arrived 5 minutes late. She looked tired. She ordered something. I ordered coffee. She said, "What will it take, Dale?" I wrapped both hands around my cup. I said, "Joint custody. 50%. What I've always asked for." She said, "That's not on the table." I said, "Then we don't have anything to discuss." She leaned forward. She said, "I'm trying to make this easier for both of us." I said, "I know." She said, "Then why won't you work with me?" I said, "I am working." She looked at me for a long time. She did not understand the answer. She pushed the offer higher. She named a financial number, a monthly figure. I said, "No." She said the word please. I said, "No." I finished my coffee. I stood. I said, "I'll see you through the lawyers, Renata." I left. I pulled the folder out of the kitchen drawer when I got home. I opened to the red tab. I read the Delmar ruling again. I knew what I had. I was not anxious. I was not angry. I was certain. Year 4. Year 5. Cora was 9, then 11. She played basketball on Saturdays. She wore number 14. She scored 6 points in 1 game and talked about it for 2 weeks. I was there. I was always there. My lawyer filed 2 modification motions in year 4. Both were denied at the initial hearing. I appealed 1. The appeal was continued twice. The second continuance pushed the hearing date back 9 months. Crestman filed a response characterizing my documentation as, quote, "a pattern of litigation harassment by a non-custodial parent." I put the filing in my yellow tab. I counted it. It was entry 43. Year 5. Cora asked me once why I never got angry. We were driving back from her basketball game. She had scored 4 points. She said, "Dad, why are you always so calm? Even about Mom's lawyer and all that stuff." I looked at the road. I said, "Because I know what I know." She said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means I'm waiting for the right time." She looked out the window. She said, "Okay." She trusted me. That was enough. Year 6. Crestman's office called Tamora, my new lawyer by then, a sharper instrument than Forsyth, in a panic. Not a professional inquiry, a panic. The message relayed through Tamara was, "What does he want? Tell me what he wants and I'll give it to him." Tamara called me and told me. I was standing in the kitchen. I said, "Tell him joint custody, 50-50, what I've always wanted." What he always refused. Tamara was quiet. She said, "Dale, they're offering a financial settlement, a large one." I said, "No." She said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I'm sure." She said, "Can I ask what you have?" I said, "You'll see it when we're in the room." She respected that. She did not push. Cressman's final message came through Tamara on a Wednesday. He wanted to negotiate, not argue, not fight. Negotiate. Tamara called me at 6:14 in the evening. I was making dinner. She said, "He wants to talk terms." I turned off the stove. I said, "Yes, now we can talk." I walked to the kitchen drawer. I took out the folder. I opened to the red tab. I read the first line of the Delmar ruling. Sustained parental diligence constitutes its own form of legal standing. 6 years. I had been patient for 6 years. The antagonist had no moves left. It was time. The mediation room was on the 4th floor of the County Civil Courts building. A long table, gray carpet, a window with blinds half closed. Cold in the way courthouse rooms are always cold, even in May. Cressman was already seated when Tamara and I walked in. He looked older. Not old, just older than 6 years ago. The confidence was still there, but it sat differently on him now, like a coat that no longer fit quite right. His associate was next to him with a legal pad. The mediator, Judge Calloway, was at the head of the table. I sat down. I placed my folder on the table in front of me. I did not open it yet. Judge Calloway said, "Let's discuss custody arrangements. Mr. Harrison, you filed the request for this session." Tamara said, "Your Honor, before we discuss terms, there is a foundational issue we need to address." Cressman said, "I'm sure whatever Mr. Harrison has." Tamara said, "In re Delmar v. Delmar, Arapahoe County Family Court, 1998. Case number FC-11998-2241. The room was quiet. Cressman's associate looked at him. Cressman looked at Tamara. Tamara laid out 3 documents on the table. The Delmar ruling, my documentation of material changes, the enrollment form. She walked through each one without raising her voice. She was clear and methodical, and she did not pause for effect. She said, "The original ruling in FC 2016-0847 did not cite Delmar. Delmar establishes that sustained, documented parental diligence constitutes evidentiary standing for custody modification. Mr. Harrison has documented 17 material procedural violations over 6 years. The pattern meets and exceeds the Delmar threshold." She paused. She said, "Furthermore, Colorado Revised Statute 14-10-124 requires the court to consider each parent's willingness to support the other parent's relationship with the child. The original custody evaluation never addressed this statute, not once." Cressman said, "Your Honor, the applicability of..." Judge Calloway held up one hand. She was reading the Delmar ruling. She read it for 3 minutes. The room was quiet. Cressman's associate stopped writing. Calloway looked up. She said, "Counsel is correct. Delmar is binding precedent in this county. The original order does not cite it. Statute 14-10-124 is equally clear. This mediation must proceed under both standards." She looked at Cressman. She said, "Does opposing counsel wish to respond?" Cressman looked at the ruling in front of him. He had not brought a copy. He had not known it existed. He said, "I'll need a moment to review." Calloway said, "Take your time." He did not take long. He leaned toward his associate. They spoke quietly. The associate turned her legal pad face down on the table. There are moments when you see the exact second something breaks. Not a person, not a spirit, a position. This was that second. Cressman sat back. He said, "My client is open to discussing modified terms." Tamara said, "My client's terms have not changed in 6 years." We negotiated for 4 hours. I sat at the table and spoke when Tamara asked me to. I did not raise my voice. I did not look at Cressman longer than necessary. I drank water from a plastic cup and read from my folder when referenced. The final terms. Joint physical custody. I would have primary residential custody, 70%. Renata would have visitation, 2 weekends per month, and 2 weeks each summer. Equal decision-making authority on all medical, educational, and major life decisions. Renata would pay $800 per month in child support. A permanent court order requiring 60 days written notice for any material change in schooling, residence, or routine. No challenge to custody arrangement without court-verified substantial new evidence. Judge Calloway read the agreed terms aloud. She signed the order. She stamped it. She slid it across the table to me. I picked it up. I read it word by word. Every line. My name. Cora's name. The terms governing the rest of her childhood. Tamora shook my hand outside the courtroom. She said, "You were right. The whole time, you were right." I said, "Yes." She said, "How did you know they'd never found Delmar?" I said, "Because they called my case straightforward." She looked at me. She smiled a little. We walked to the elevator. I picked Cora up from school that afternoon. She was 12 years old. She came out through the double doors with her backpack on one shoulder, looking slightly off to the left, the way she looks in every photo ever taken of her. She climbed in the truck. She buckled her seatbelt. She looked at me. She said, "What happened?" I said, "We won." She said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means you're staying with me. It means I'm your dad, and nobody can take that away." She leaned over and hugged me across the center console. I put my arm around her. We stayed like that for a moment in the school parking lot. Then I drove home. That evening I sat at the kitchen table. Helen sat beside me. I had the custody order in front of me. I read through it one final time. Helen put her hand on my shoulder. She said, "You did it." I said, "We did." I folded the order carefully, not into my coat pocket, not into the folder with the blue tabs and the yellow tabs and the red tabs. I walked to the shelf in the hallway. I placed it there, standing upright, visible. The folder went into the drawer one last time. The drawer closed. The manila folder had 214 pages in it by the end. I had driven to the courthouse library 41 times. I had paid $63.40 in copy fees over 6 years. I had said no to 4 settlement offers. I had filed 7 motions. I had waited 2,194 days. Cora is 16 now. She still plays basketball. She still hates socks with seams. She asked me last spring why I never fought with anyone, why I never yelled, never threatened, never pushed back in the way that looks like fighting. I thought about the folding chairs in the courthouse, the cold metal, the coffee nobody trusted. The date in the margin of page 3 of an order a lawyer called straightforward. I said, "I didn't need to fight. I just needed to be right and wait long enough for it to matter." She thought about that. She said, "Is that hard?" I said, "The hardest thing I've ever done." She nodded like she understood. She will carry that forward with her. I am certain of it. The custody order sits on the shelf in the hallway. A quiet document in a quiet house. Some men fight with noise and force and pressure. I fought with a folder, a copy machine, and 6 years of patience. And that made all the difference.